three. 1, 2, 3 questions. You ready?
I think so.
Okay. Number 1. How come you guys don't do any unstable or multi-planar training?
We do.
Okay. So you know how this goes. We give you a one-word answer and you figure out the rest.
So we got a question. We had a question from somebody who, was interested in some of the stuff that looks a little more complex. He saw some stuff on Instagram and shared it. He's like, why don't you guys do more stuff like this? The stuff like that definitely has a place. The brain really likes complexity. There's some really good studies on play, and how the brain and the body respond when there's an element of play and fun. There's a lot to be said for, moving in multi-planar ways, linking, you've got all the sling systems and, the anatomy trains, all that stuff is great. But what we like to focus on mainly and why we do multi-planar stuff and why we do this stuff, although we do it in a different way, we have to consider joint position. So when, this particular video that I was sent, although the moves were really interesting, the joint positions weren't really allowing what we consider training. Like, there's such a thing as working out, there's such a thing as playing, and there's such a thing as training. When you're going for a specific adaptation, it really matters what the joint feels, what the joint senses. So if you're looking to do, let's say, a swing, a lot of people are gonna say, go ahead and turn to the side for me. A lot of people are gonna say, oh, we do a swing for the posterior chain, which is all of that, and technically you will in a lot of ways. But when you go back down from, let's go and go to the top of the swing. So when you go back down into the swing, into this hike position, if you get a lot of disconnect there, okay, go ahead and arch that back up. There we go. You're not getting a lot of movement through the hip. Or if you go ahead and come out of that before you break something.
Yeah.
If you have, let's say a split stance and you have a spine that's kind of locked in extension and you have the hips that are rotated forward, you're not really getting a training benefit at that joint unless the pelvis reorients, which most of the time it doesn't. You're not really getting that joint specific training. So it's not that we don't like that sort of training. It's just that very few people can do it with joint integrity, and we're interested in training because, if we're going to do something fun, we're going to go for a hike, I'm going to do some boxing, something like that.
Right.
So for training specific purposes, we like the joints to do what the joints are supposed to do, and it's really rare that you see a lot of the really complex kettlebell moves that are being executed with integrity. So we don't do a lot of that. Further, if you look at something like a one-arm swing, you're getting a ton of rotation. You have to get rotation. There's a lot of rotation going on through the hip. As long as you're, when you come down, your knees aren't, swinging all over the place. You're going to get some internal, external rotation. You're going to get some multi-planar training. Even though it looks like it's a bilateral stance, you still get a lot of the stimulus. And in fact, I would argue you're going to get more multi-planar movement through a well-executed one-arm swing or a snatch than you will in a lot of the other fancier kettlebell moves.
Got it. Yeah, and it's about training, because a lot of times with that fancier stuff, if your goal is to be strong, that may not necessarily get you there because you purely can't use the load that's required, and there's many factors. But I like that was good. You can work out, you can play, and you can train. And we just happen to take mostly the train approach to things we do.
Yeah, nothing wrong with either approach, but that's just where we want to be is we want to help people train.
Cool. Question number 2. I don't hinge as well when I swing a heavier bell. Is that normal?
Yes.
Perfect. No, I'm not going to do that joke twice on you.
It is. I actually got this one twice this week, and it's a really good question. A lot of people are tempted, if let's say they have a really, really deep hinge. First of all, I want to reiterate, he's going to have a different lower body strategy. I don't go by hinge. He doesn't go by hinge. It's about what the quads and the hips are doing. So different lower body strategy. He's built differently than I am. He's about 4 feet taller. So this is
You can tell by
me.
the video, by the way. Like anytime you see us next to each other in the video, I look hulking compared to
I'm a tiny little
same
man.
weight.
So this is me. This is kind of my max depth. I can feel a good stretch back here, and he can get a lot farther back. He can get a little more parallel. He can even go down here without any problem. He's just got much longer legs, and what a lot of this comes down to is the length of the bones. You know, tibia length, femur length are going to be important, but how your mass, your center mass, is distributed. So everyone's is, for the most part, going to be somewhere between your belly button and your junk. Okay, so I have more mass in my upper body than he does. One, I have a longer torso. Two, he's got kind of a longer, leaner build, where I'm kind of built like a candied apple. Okay, so more mass up here. My center of mass is going to be higher relative to the rest of my body. So if, let's say, just to exaggerate, let's say my center of mass goes from here to here. If I've got my base of support and this center of mass is coming out over it, I'm going to fall. So that's obviously not going to be a strategy that I'm going to be able to use. So that's why when people hinge at all, they shift their butt back, because they're keeping the center of mass in that base of support. The weight of the kettlebell needs to be incorporated into your mass. That's going to shift everything, especially as you're swinging up and down. So having more a deeper hinge is going to take more mass and redistribute it and make it a little more difficult to control. So it's a very, very common strategy for people to get a little more knee dominant when they swing heavy kettlebells, because leaning over more, closer to the outside of your base of support, can really tug you forward, can tug you back. It's a much harder motion to maintain because you're dealing with so much more weight. So rather than forward and back, you'll see a little bit of this shift up and down. Now, as long as you go ahead and turn to the side for me. So as long as, go ahead and bring your arms up. So as long as, like when we do our timing drill, so after the float, if he brings his arms down here and they're connected, okay, the mass of the bell and his center mass are connected. So he can squat straight down as long as his arms stay in. Don't do that. So whether they're here or he's here, the arms are still in the same place. As long as that mass is connected, meaning his arms are connected to his body, he's going to be in a safe enough position to go a little more vertical. So it's not, you know, we're not saying that you should suddenly do this, but you're going to see a difference of, you know, maybe 10, 15 degrees, because it's going to feel a lot more comfortable for people.
Yeah, I said, and in the snatch I did today, that was like the main focus, was just making sure that I had this. And in fact, my snatches were a bit squattier, and that works for me better, but my center mass is all in line. So
Because you had your arm connected to the body.
yeah, that was the focus.
That's
Cool.
the focus, folks.
Focus, right here, focus. 2 + 1 = 3. How wide should my stance be?
Wide enough.
Just wide enough. No more, no less. How do you think? This isn't going to work, obviously.
So, well, it could. So the question we got specifically was
With
about...
like that bottle opener kettlebell?
The question we got specifically was about the swing. So if, you know, this really depends on training goals and training objectives. And I think for whatever reason, even though, you know, different moves, people seem to understand the deadlift analogy the best. So if you look at a sumo stance deadlift, okay, really, really wide. Go ahead and turn to the side so they can see. So go ahead and shift your hips back as far as they can go.
I just want a little something just in case.
All right. So we've got right about there. That's as far back as he goes with that big here. Let me mark it. This
Okay. This is
mobility
good.
stick.
Okay.
All right. So it's gonna go. We're gonna go right through the trochanter here-ish. So we're gonna go right there. That's where that stick's gonna be. So that's his. Actually, no. Let me do this. Let me go to the edge of your butt. Go back down. People are looking at your butt. We might as well give them what they want. All right. So that's his sumo stance. Now go ahead and narrow your stance, and then push your hips all the way back. So you can see he's bumping into the stick. We need to move it back a little bit. Okay, so the the width of the stance is going to dictate which muscles you use. When you're moving the feet out, you're orienting your adductors, your abductors in a different way. You're going to, if you're trying to create a sagittal motion, then you're going to use whatever is in the sagittal plane. In this case, it's here and here. Well, what we want to do, if the training goal is to use these and this, the flexion and extension muscles, then the farther out they are, the less likely it is that we're going to use them and the less distance we can travel backwards. So if you have, let's say you have a one-arm swing, okay? If you have a one-arm swing, you don't even need to be that wide. You're fine there. Now, is that comfortable? That's a different issue. So you want to be as wide as you need to for the bell, for your particular grip. So if you're doing kind of this pistol grip here, you're going to be able to get away with narrower versus turning it, with the handle more parallel to your body. You might need to be a little wider. So is that comfortable? Single arm swings are going to be narrower generally than double arm swings because of the width. Yeah. So if you look at,
I can make more room.
Yeah. So he's going to rotate a little bit there to get in. But if he brings his arms up, okay, so you've got this triangle from here to here down to there. This is going to need to go back through here, okay? And if he wants to reach back more, the only way he's going to be able to do that is to widen his stance, and that may be more comfortable. Now, the distance between here and here and the person. So if you look at the width of my shoulder and where my hands are, plus I'm a little bit busty. So this is about as narrow as I can get my arms, okay? So when I come back into my the bottom part of the swing here, the kettlebell will fit through here, but my arms won't. A single arm can go back just fine, but my double arms can't get through there. So I'm gonna have to go wider, even though my feet are wider than my hips, they're wider than I need to be. I'm gonna need to go a little bit wider to get both arms. So is it a single arm? Is it a double arm? You got to consider that. You got to consider the width of the bell, and what is your training objective? If your training objective is to go forward and back, then we just demonstrated the closer your feet are, the farther back your hips can go. Further, if you look at your hips, your glutes, and your hamstrings accelerate the bell. The thing that creates power is the floor. Okay, ground reaction force is the thing you need for your swing. If you don't have your quads, you do not have a powerful swing. Now, if you're going to drive force into the floor and you're going to jump, go ahead and get your feet as wide as you can. Now go ahead and give me a good vertical. Okay. So not so great.
What's up, LeBron?
So if you're going to jump, you want to get your feet under the hips. Okay, so this is going to be, that narrow stance is going to allow him to put more force into the floor. That's where your ballistic, that's where your force actually comes from, is the ground. So the short answer is you want your stance as narrow as possible, but that was a few of the reasons why. Yeah,
and this is something that kind of changed a lot of things about ballistics with me, was finding that right stance for each little thing, and so I worked on it and I still do. Is this feel as powerful as I want it to be? And again, that objective in the play. So when you're training to set that up, try a few different things. That's the point of training, is to try it and find what you like and then work that for a little bit, right?
One other thing that is really, really important to point out is that the position of the hips is going to be relevant. If you look at hip anatomy, you'll come across terms like retroversion, anteversion. It's basically the position of the sockets as they come out, and some people don't have hips that just face straight forward and back. I believe Brett Jones actually wrote a really good article about this, about how his hips need to turn out a little bit because that's his structure.
Yeah.
So when we say as narrow as possible, it doesn't mean possible, I guess technically this is possible, but that's not realistic. So we're talking about comfortable, we're talking about efficient, we're talking about what does your hip anatomy allow. So if the only way you can swing a kettlebell is to stand like this and this is comfortable and you're training, so you're putting the force through the joint that you need to put through the joint to make it adapt. If you're achieving the objective, you're gaining your strength or whatever it is you want to do, that's cool. This is as narrow as possible. If you go forward, or let's say you move your feet forward and suddenly you're creating some kind of hip impingement, then that's not what we're talking about.
Don't do that.
Don't do that.
Yeah, so it's subjective. All right. Anything else?
No.
Nothing else.
Nothing else.
All right, you got those three. Hey, if there's something specific you want to know about, please send us a question through our Instagram, email, or comment below, wherever this is showing. Just comment and put your question there. Remember, there's no dumb questions.
Can we comment above?
Comment above.
Wait, that's not where the comments are though. That's YouTube. Maybe YouTube, get on that YouTube.
Hey, YouTube, cater to us. Stay strong. Yeah.